The applause was thunderous, but the loudest sound in my head was my father's laugh from 2 weeks earlier, sharp, dismissive, just a lowly secretary. My sister's voice followed, sweet with poison. Invite us anyway. It'll be entertaining. I stood on the stage lights, heart pounding, knowing this room was about to hear a truth my family had spent years burying under their smiles. I remember the kitchen where dreams went to die. My resignation letters never sent. The nights I typed until my fingers burned while they slept upstairs, certain I would never be more than the help. I learned early how silence sharpens you, how patience becomes a weapon when you polish it with pain. They taught me obedience. I taught myself strategy. Every insult became a note, every ignored achievement a calculation. I watched my father boast about his connections. My sister parade her borrowed confidence, both blind to the quiet person in the corner who listened more than she spoke. The invitation was simple. Gold letters, a date, a venue, no explanations. My father laughed when he read it. My sister smirked. They came dressed for embarrassment, ready to watch me stand small. They didn't notice how calm I was. Calm is what comes before a storm you planned. Backstage smelled like dust and ambition. A producer asked if I was nervous. I smiled. Nerves are for people who didn't prepare. On the screen behind me, names flickered: sponsors, partners, donors, some of them familiar to my family for reasons they would soon remember. I stepped forward as my name was announced, the title rolling through the hall like a confession. I saw my father straighten, confused. My sister's smile froze, cracked at the edges. The audience waited. Cameras leaned in. Somewhere in the front row, a truth recognized its moment. I began to speak carefully. Not loud, not proud, just precise. I told a story about work that happens in shadows, about loyalty mistaken for weakness, about hands that build while others take credit. I felt eyes shift, breaths hold. The room started connecting dots my family had pretended didn't exist. My father leaned forward now. My sister's phone slipped from her fingers. I paused, letting the silence do what it does best, force people to listen. The next words were ready. The final piece was in place. And then I lifted my eyes from the podium and let them travel slowly across the crowd. As if I were searching for courage. In truth, I was measuring timing. Faces blurred into one long expectation. The pause stretched, uncomfortable, deliberate. Silence has weight when you know how to use it. I wasn't supposed to be here, I said softly. People like me don't usually get invited into rooms like this. A ripple of murmurs passed through the audience. Somewhere, a glass clink. I felt my father's gaze on my back like a question he was afraid to ask. I spoke about my first job title, the one that sounded small enough to laugh at: secretary. Assistant. Support. Words that made people relax around you. Words that made them careless. I talked about calendars managed, crises absorbed, deals whispered in hallways while I took notes no one thought mattered. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. On the big screen, a timeline appeared. Projects, dates, growth curves. The audience leaned forward as if pulled by gravity. My sister shifted in her seat. She knew charts. She loved charts when they belonged to her. I told them how I learned the language of power by listening. How I watched egos sabotage themselves. How patience isn't passive, it's predatory. I described nights when the office lights stayed on long after applause had gone home. When decisions were made by those who never planned to stand under a spotlight. The producer had warned me to keep it short. I ignored him. This wasn't a speech, it was a ledger. Another slide appeared. Partnership signatures. Footnotes. My father's brow furrowed. He recognized the names now. He had bragged about them at dinners, taken credit for proximity, never realizing how close he actually was to the source. I felt the old ache rise. Memories of asking for a recommendation and getting a joke instead of being told to know my place. I let the achy pass. Pain is useful only when it's controlled. My family taught me something important. I continued. They taught me how people see value, and how easily they overlook it when it's quiet. A few heads turned instinctively toward my father and sister, as if the room sensed the direction of truth before it arrived. My sister's smile returned, practiced, defensive. She always smiled when cornered. I wondered if she remembered the day she took credit for my proposal, the one that saved a failing account. I wondered if she remembered telling me it was just business. The screen shifted again. A blurred document, then another. Applause tried to start and failed, choked by confusion. I could feel the room tipping, the way a glass tilts just before it spills. I didn't come here to embarrass anyone, I said, and that was the closest thing to a lie I allowed myself. I came to honor the work, all of it, even the work done in silence. A memory flashed, my father laughing, leaning back in his chair, saying success was about being seen. I almost smiled at how wrong he had been. From the corner of my eye, I saw him whisper to my sister. She shook her head slightly. The audience was no longer theirs, it never had been. I spoke about trust. About how systems fail when people assume loyalty is weakness. About how the smallest titles sometimes hold the biggest keys. The words settled differently now. They weren't motivational, they were explanatory. A man in the front row, one of the judges, nodded slowly. He'd seen this story before, just not from the inside. Cameras caught my father's face tightening, his certainty unraveling frame by frame. I took a breath and let my voice drop. There's a moment, I said, when you realize the door you were knocking on all these years was never locked. You were just knocking from the wrong side. The screen went dark, no data, no names. Just my reflection in the glass. I could feel the question building in the room, the need for a reveal, for a final declaration. I denied it to them. Control is choosing when not to strike. I thanked the committee, I thanked the team carefully, accurately. I thanked mentors who knew when to stay invisible. Each thank you was a thread, pulling tighter around a truth my family could finally sense but not yet grasp. As I stepped back from the podium, the applause arrived late but heavy, like rain after drought. It washed over me without touching what mattered. I glanced once more at my father. He looked smaller now, not defeated, just confused. My sister stared at the dark screen as if it might blink and rescue her. Backstage, the producer exhaled. "That was unexpected," he said. I nodded. Unexpected is another word for unprepared. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Messages stacked up, names lighting the screen, some familiar, some overdue. I didn't open them. Timing. Through the curtain I heard my name again. Whispered, question repeated. The room was rearranging itself around a new understanding. I stood still, letting it happen. In the mirror, I barely recognized the person looking back at me. Not because I'd changed, but because I finally saw what they never bothered to see. Behind me, the stage manager counted down for the next segment. Ahead of me, my family waited with 1,000 questions they didn't yet know how to ask. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, straightened my jacket, and took one last breath. It was almost time. The hall smelled of polished wood and anticipation. Even the air seemed heavier, thick with the collective curiosity of hundreds of people who didn't yet know what they had stumbled into. I moved with purpose, not urgency. Every step was deliberate, every gesture calculated. I had learned early that impatience is the enemy of impact. Backstage, the murmur of staff and volunteers buzzed like electricity. But my mind was elsewhere. I replayed the dinner table from 2 weeks ago, my father's ladder, my sister's smug comment, my mother quietly watching without saying a word. The memory had become a fuel, stored in a compartment of my mind labeled strategic patience. Revenge, I had learned, is a long game. One misstep, one flash of anger, and the moment loses its power. As I walked back onto the stage for a Q&A session, the producers had scheduled, I noticed subtle shifts in the audience. The whispering had started, half curiosity, half fear. People were sensing that something important was happening beyond the standard accolades and applause. I could feel my family tightening their chairs, as if the very furniture was betraying them. The first question came from a young journalist, polite, expectant. "What inspired your journey?" she asked. I smiled, a small, unreadable curl of lips, and paused, letting the weight of silence linger. Silence is a language few understand, but those who do recognize it instantly. My father was leaning forward now, eyes narrowing, trying to catch the hidden meaning behind that pause. "I suppose inspiration is often disguised as dismissal," I said slowly, each word measured. "When people tell you aren't enough, when they laugh at your ambitions, you learn 2 things. First, patience. Second, how to watch." A quiet gasp fluttered through the room. Cameras tilted. People instinctively leaned closer, wanting to catch every syllable. My father's jaw tightened imperceptibly. My sister's fingers fiddled with her bracelet, twisting it as if it might comfort her. But she knew, as I knew, that comfort had long left this room. The next slide appeared on the massive screen behind me. It was simple, 2 columns of text, labeled expectations and reality. The expectations column listed what my family thought I would become: secretary, assistant, invisible, easily dismissed. The reality column was stark: awards, recognition, influence. The visual clarity cut sharper than any words I could have spoken. I could feel the tension building like a pressure cooker. The audience was caught between admiration and incredulity. The room seemed to shrink around my family. They were exposed not to strangers but to the truth they had spent years ignoring. My father's face was pale, and his hands were tightening into fists under the table. My sister's smile had vanished entirely, replaced with a brittle mask of confusion and fear. I never sought validation. I continued, voice low, almost intimate, like confessing a secret meant for one person in the room, but loud enough that every ear caught it. I sought mastery. I studied the rules that others assumed were invisible. I learned how to move unseen, how to absorb knowledge without drawing attention. And slowly, quietly, I grew stronger than anyone imagined. The lights dimmed slightly, focusing attention entirely on me. I had arranged this subtle shift to heighten suspense, a trick I had picked up from years of observing public speaking, business pitches, and high-stakes negotiations. Timing, as always, was everything. Behind me, the timeline of my achievements rolled continuously. Awards, promotions, projects, partnerships, all presented without commentary, letting the audience connect the dots themselves. I could see people whispering, pointing discreetly, nodding in recognition. Some were impressed, others were unsettled. My family, however, was in the eye of the storm. They couldn't look away, couldn't stop analyzing every slide, every sentence, every pause. I took a slow step forward, letting my presence fill the stage. "People often confuse visibility with strength," I said. "They assume that the loudest voice dominates, but real power, real impact comes from those who move silently, patiently, and purposefully. Those who wait for the perfect moment to reveal themselves." My father leaned back in his chair, silent for the first time all evening. The audience sensed the tension, whispering amongst themselves. My sister's fingers now trembled visibly, betraying the veneer of control she had clung to all these years. I could almost hear their thoughts, unspoken but vivid. What have we missed? How could we have overlooked this? What does this mean for us? I paused again, letting the weight of those unasked questions hang. A reporter tried to interject, but I raised a hand, a subtle but unmistakable signal that no interruptions would be entertained. The room hushed. Everyone understood that whatever came next would demand their full attention. Every insult, every dismissal, every laugh directed at me was a lesson. I said I cataloged them, I stored them, I transformed them into strategy. I never acted rashly, I never sought petty revenge. I built a plan, I waited, I watched, I learned. And now I stand here. My voice was calm, but the intensity was palpable. The audience felt it like an electric current pulling them closer. The screen shifted again. This time, it displayed a series of letters, emails, and documents blurred enough to protect confidentiality, but recognizable enough that anyone familiar with corporate procedures would understand the significance. Partnerships that my father had bragged about, projects my sister had claimed as her own, names, signatures, and achievements that belonged to me, but had been stolen, ignored, or dismissed. The audience began murmuring again, but this time with realization, not mere curiosity. I glanced at my father. His expression was a mixture of disbelief and fear. He had built his life on the assumption that he could control perception, that he could dictate reality with charm and arrogance. Now, standing in the middle of a room full of witnesses, he realized that the narrative he had constructed for years was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do about it. My family always thought success was about appearance. I said, voice steady, almost clinical. They believed the right clothes, the right connections, the right words could mask mediocrity. They were wrong. True success, true recognition is earned in silence unseen, in patience perfected. My sister shifted in her seat again. She had been a master of appearances herself, using charm, gossip, and cunning to navigate social circles. But even she could not escape the truth now, nor could she anticipate the storm quietly building before its final release. The audience leaned in as I continued, each word measured, deliberate. There is a moment in every life when those who underestimated you realize they were wrong. That moment is not loud. It is not flashy, it is inevitable. And it arrives at a time you choose, not a moment you are forced to endure. The murmurs had grown into whispers, and whispers into a low hum of recognition. The stage lights caught the beads of sweat forming on my sister's brow. My father's hands were still clenched, but now they trembled with the first signs of fear. The room itself seemed to lean forward, as if the walls wanted to witness the unfolding revelation. I walked slowly toward the edge of the stage, letting my gaze sweep across the audience. Every person there, every observer, every supporter or skeptic, was now part of a story that had been years in the making. My family, the unsuspecting protagonists of my private education in patience and strategy, could sense it but could not yet grasp the depth. And then, for the first time that evening, I let a shadow of a smile cross my lips. Not triumph, not cruelty, just recognition of timing perfected. The final chapter, the revelation that would complete the narrative, still waited. And waiting, I knew, was the greatest power of all. I stepped back from the podium. Cameras zoomed in, capturing my posture, my silence, my presence. The applause was tentative, polite, curious. The audience knew they were witnessing something unprecedented, but they did not yet understand the full story. My family felt it in their bones. My father's jaw clenched, my sister's hands shook. Their assumptions, their underestimations, were unraveling thread by thread. I glanced down at the program in my hand, the date circled in gold ink. That date, that invitation, that moment, it was more than a celebration, it was a message. Not for the world, not for strangers, but for them. And I would deliver the conclusion only when I deemed the timing perfect. I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of anticipation settle over the room. Each second stretched, drawn out like a carefully rehearsed scene in a play designed to hold the audience on edge. And in that stretch of time, I understood something profound. Revenge is not merely action. It is art. It is strategy. It is patience refined into a weapon so precise that even those who hurt you cannot see it coming until it is too late. The lights dimmed slightly again, signaling the next segment of the program. People began to shift in their seats, murmuring amongst themselves. I remained still, my eyes fixed for a fleeting moment on my father and sister. They were aware, unnerved, but powerless. I had already written the story, I had already set the stage. All that remained was the final, calculated act, and that would come only when I chose. The producer whispered something about the next speaker. I nodded, silent, composed, letting the momentum carry me toward the final reveal, which was not yet mine to deliver. My family would wait, they would guess, they would fear. And that waiting, the tension, the dread, the anticipation, was itself part of the revenge I had cultivated for years. And so, as I stepped hostage and into the shadows of the wings, the story remained unfinished. The storm had gathered. The inevitable confrontation, the revelation of all truths, all the years of unseen labor and meticulously calculated plans had not yet been released. It waited, and in waiting it became more potent, more irresistible, more terrifying in its inevitability. The corridor beyond the stage was narrow and dim, lined with framed photos of past winners, faces frozen in moments of triumph that rarely told the whole story. I walked past them slowly, heels echoing softly, feeling the aftershocks of the room I had just left. Behind me the applause faded into speculation. Ahead of me, something quieter waited. My phone vibrated again. I stopped, this time one message from my father. No words. Just a missed call notification. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without responding. Some conversations deserve preparation. Others deserve silence. A staff member offered me water. I shook my head. My mouth was dry. But my mind was clear, too clear. This was the clarity that comes when a plan has matured beyond doubt. I could feel it settling into my bones. From a monitor mounted on the wall, I watched the audience. The camera panned across faces still trying to process what they had witnessed. I saw people leaning toward each other, whispering, pointing discreetly. And then I saw my family again. My father sat rigid, hands folded now, as if restraint had replaced denial. My sister leaned close to him, speaking fast, her eyes darting around the room, searching for control where none existed. Control is a fragile illusion. I learned that early, a memory surfaced. My sister standing in front of a mirror years ago, rehearsing confidence, telling me that perception mattered more than substance. If they believe it, she had said, it becomes true. I had nodded then, filing the lesson away. She had never asked what I planned to do with it. The next segment of the ceremony began. Another winner, another speech, polite applause. But the energy in the room was altered. The audience listened differently now, distracted. Restless, something had been set in motion that refused to be ignored. I stayed in the wings unseen. Being invisible again felt natural, comforting even. This was where I had always done my best work. A producer approached me. "They're asking questions," he said. "Sponsors, board members. A few journalists want follow-ups." I met his eyes and nodded once. "Tell them I'll be available later," I said. "Not yet." He hesitated, then agreed. Everyone understands timing when it's presented with confidence. I returned to the monitor. The camera caught my father rubbing his temples. He looked older than I remembered, smaller. Not weak, just unprepared. My sister had stopped talking now. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, face composed in a way that suggested she was thinking very hard, very fast. She was smart, I would never deny her that, but she had always mistaken cleverness for foresight. Another vibration in my pocket, this time a message from my sister. "We need to talk now." I almost smiled. Need is a word people use when they realize they've lost leverage. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on my breathing, grounding myself. I reminded myself of the years that led here, the quiet mornings, the late nights, the work done without applause. The times I had been underestimated not by strangers, but by the people who were supposed to know me best. Those memories didn't hurt anymore. They had transformed into something sharper, more precise. A volunteer peeked around the corner. "You're on again in 10 minutes, she said. Panel discussion. I thanked her and adjusted my jacket. 10 minutes. Enough time for anticipation to ferment. Back in the hall, the lights shifted subtly, signaling another transition. I could feel the audience's attention snap back into focus, drawn by the promise of continuation. Humans crave completion. They dislike unfinished stories. I intended to use that. As I walked back onto the stage, a hush fell, not the polite quiet of etiquette, but the charged silence of expectation. I took my seat among the panelists, all accomplished in their own right, all unaware that they were now supporting characters in a larger narrative. The moderator smiled, practiced and calm. "Would like to open with a question about leadership," she said. "Specifically, the role of resilience in success." Her eyes flicked toward me, inviting. I leaned forward slightly, hands relaxed. "Resilience," I said, "is often misunderstood. People think it's about enduring hardship. It's not. It's about remembering. About keeping a record of who treated you how and choosing carefully what to do with that information." A murmur rippled through the room. The moderator blinked, momentarily thrown off script. I continued. "Some people use resilience to survive, others use it to prepare." The camera cut to my father. He stiffened. My sister's eyes narrowed, sharp with recognition. She was starting to see the pattern now. The structure beneath the words. She always caught on late, but not too late to feel it. The moderator shifted the discussion, sensing the tension. Another panelist spoke about teamwork. I listened politely, nodding at appropriate moments, but my awareness remained fixed on the front row. My family hadn't moved. They couldn't. This moment had them pinned. When the microphone returned to me, I spoke again, this time about loyalty. About how trust is built not through grand gestures, but through consistency. About how betrayal often comes disguised as familiarity. I didn't accuse, I didn't expel, I didn't need to. The truth was already circling, tightening its grip. As the panel wrapped up, applause followed, stronger now, more confident. People were beginning to choose sides, even if they didn't yet understand the stakes. I stood, acknowledged the room, and stepped away once more. In the aisle, my father rose halfway from his seat, as if to approach me, then hesitated. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. In that instant, I saw something new there. Not anger, not pride. The kind that comes from realizing the story you told yourself is no longer the one being told. My sister didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead, jaw set, already planning her next move. That too was familiar. Backstage again. The quiet wrapped around me like a cloak. I checked the time. Everything was aligning. Messages continued to arrive unanswered. Each one added to the pressure, the uncertainty. I had learned that anticipation can be more punishing than confrontation. I moved toward a small private room reserved for speakers, closing the door behind me. Inside there was a mirror, a chair, a table with untouched refreshments. I set my phone down and finally allowed myself to sit. For the first time that night, I felt the weight of it all, not regret, not guilt, but gravity. The kind that precedes irreversible change. Once the final step was taken, there would be no returning to who we had been. I looked at my reflection. Calm, composed, ready. Outside, I could hear footsteps approaching, voices lowered. Familiar rhythms. They were coming closer now, drawn by questions they could no longer avoid. I stood straight in my jacket once more and turned toward the door. Not yet, I told myself. Just a little longer. Because the most powerful moment is not when the truth is revealed, but when those who denied it realize it's already too late to stop it. I opened the door slowly, letting the faint hallway light spill across the room. My father and sister were there, waiting, though they tried not to look as though they had been waiting. Their composure was a mask, thin and fragile. I could see through it, through the calculated pauses and controlled expressions. They had spent years underestimating me. Tonight the illusion was ending. "Can we talk?" My father said, voice hesitant, unfamiliar with the weight it carried. He had never asked that before. Not when he dismissed me as a secretary, not when he took credit for my work, not when he laughed at my ambitions. "Yes," I said softly, closing the distance between us. "We can." The hallway felt smaller now, tighter, charged with unspoken tension. My sister shifted her weight, crossing her arms, as if she were trying to make herself taller, to appear in control. Control was what they clung to, but I had already dismantled it in silence, with patience, with proof. I led them to a small, private room near the stage. The lights dimmed, isolating us from the world outside, forcing confrontation, focus, recognition. I gestured for them to sit. My father hesitated but complied. My sister plopped into the chair with a sharp exhale, eyes locked on me. "I suppose you want answers." I began, calm, deliberate. "You want to understand how someone you dismissed, someone you thought invisible, became more powerful than you ever imagined." My father looked down, swallowing. My sister's lips pressed into a thin line, but her eyes betrayed anxiety. She had always loved to read people, yet tonight she was the one being read. "You dismissed me," I said. "You laughed at me. You made me feel small. And you assumed that smallness would last forever. You assumed silence was submission. You were wrong." I pulled out a folder I had carried with me, one they had never seen before. Inside were documents, photos, emails, contracts, proof of every moment they had claimed as their own, every opportunity they had overlooked, every time they had underestimated me. The folder was heavy in my hands, and so was the truth inside it. I didn't retaliate immediately, I continued. I waited, I observed, I planned. Every action you took, every word you said became data. Every insult became a lesson. Every laugh, every dismissive glance sharpened me. You think revenge is about fury or destruction, but it isn't. It's about strategy, timing, precision, and patience. My father's hands trembled slightly on his knees. My sister leaned forward, almost eager, though afraid of what I might say next. "So all of this you did it to prove a point?" she asked, voice brittle. I shook my head slowly. "Not to prove a point. To show you what happens when you underestimate someone you think is powerless. To make you feel, finally, the weight of every moment you ignored me. To make you realize that visibility isn't strength, action is." I opened the folder, letting them glimpse the first page. My father leaned in involuntarily, eyes widening. The documents showed accounts, projects, partnerships, all the work they had scoffed at, all the achievements they had dismissed, now documented, undeniable evidence that their assumptions were false. "You built your lives around the belief that control is perception," I said. "You built your pride on the assumption that people follow only what they see. But you forgot what cannot be seen is often the most dangerous. What cannot be seen is what wins." My sister's face drained of color. She whispered, almost to herself, "You were behind all of this." "Yes," I said softly. "Every success, every accolade tonight, you were spectators, not participants. You believed I was weak. I allowed you to believe it, and now, the truth is clear. You feel it, and you can't take it back." My father's voice cracked. We never thought you." His sentence ended there. There were no words capable of reconciling years of disbelief. I closed the folder, letting the weight of it sink into the room like a storm settling on the ground. "I don't need your acknowledgement," I said. "I never did. But I wanted you to understand. Not for revenge in the petty sense, but for realization. For respect, for truth. For the knowledge that underestimation has consequences." Silence fell heavy, filled with tension, regret, and the gravity of what they were just made to see. I could feel their fear. Not fear of me, but of what their actions had set into motion years ago. Every choice they had made, every dismissal, every slight, it had led here. And here they were, powerless to reverse it. I stood and walked toward the door, handing them the folder. "Keep this. Study it, Lynette. Perhaps in the future you'll understand that pride without recognition of others is empty. That laughter at someone else's ambition is temporary, but the consequences last." Neither of them moved immediately. They sat frozen, holding a tangible reminder of the life they had ignored. I didn't wait for thanks, I didn't need validation. I only needed acknowledgement from the universe itself that the truth had been revealed. As I stepped back into the hallway, the room behind me still echoed with their silence. The crowd in the main hall awaited the final segment, unaware of the private reckoning that had just occurred. But I felt lighter, finally free from the burden of invisibility, finally unshackled from the need to prove myself constantly. The recognition, the awards, the evidence, all that mattered, not for them but for me. Back on stage for the closing ceremony, I took a deep breath and walked with calm authority, letting the spotlight find me. Cameras captured the moment. Applause welcomed me. Not because they understood every detail, but because they felt the impact, the gravity, the inevitability of what they had witnessed. I paused at the podium, looking out at the audience one final time. My father and sister were in their seats silent, a mixture of disbelief and respect flickering across their faces. And for the first time, I allowed a small, quiet smile to cross my lips, not triumphal, not cruel, but complete. The night concluded with accolades, recognition, congratulations. But for my family, the story lingered. Every interaction, every glance, every thought they had about me had shifted. They knew they had underestimated me. They knew they had been outmaneuvered not by anger, not by brute force, not by chance, but by patience, intelligence, and quiet determination. I left the venue that night carrying more than awards. I carried closure. I carried justice measured and precise. I carried the knowledge that the years of invisibility, of doubt, of being laughed at, had been transformed into power. I carried the certainty that when someone dismisses you, underestimates you, or laughs at your ambition, the real strength lies in silence, preparation, and timing. And somewhere deep inside me, I understood one final truth: revenge is not destruction. It is recognition. It is inevitability. And it is complete only when those who doubted you realized too late that they were never in control. As the night ended, my family followed me out into the quiet streets, still processing, still reeling. They spoke little. The air between us was thick with unspoken understanding. And for once I was the one holding the power, not by force, not by confrontation, but by the intelligence, patience, and restraint that only years of silent preparation could achieve. That night I finally stepped into the world fully seen. And I knew whatever came next, whatever challenges, whatever disbelief, whatever laughter, they would never underestimate me again. Not ever. I had turned invisibility into influence, dismissal into recognition, and laughter into lasting respect. And that at last was the revenge I had waited for. If you want, I can also rewrite this entire story into a fully cinematic YouTube script, with scene directions, narrator cues, background music suggestions, and voice-over pauses, so it's ready to record directly for your channel. Do you want me to do that?